Good morning, everybody. How are we all today? Good. I'd like to start off by introducing our host from Manchester Community College, Dr. Pamela Mitchell, Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and Director of Library Services. Is that correct, Dr. Mitchell? Okay, I apologize. Dean of Academic Affairs. Would you like to come up?
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome all the librarians, faculty, and other academic professionals within the state and beyond who have come here today for this wonderful conference. I am Pam Mitchell, the Associate Academic Dean here at the college, and in my role, I have the pleasure of overseeing our Library and Educational Technology Center, in addition to other key academic support areas within the campus. We're very fortunate here at MCC to have one of the best library directors in the state, Debbie Herman. Is she in here? If you could stand. Debbie has been very instrumental in creating new initiatives and advancing our library service and program offerings here since she's been here with the college. We also have outstanding librarians, including Evelyn Angry-Smith, Paula Cook, and Pat Ronalter. Pat is actually a member of the planning committee who worked to plan this wonderful conference here for you today. So I thank all of them for their hard work and dedication. The focus of the conference today is on information literacy, and Manchester Community College has worked very hard on 3 initiatives in that vein. The first is the piloting of an embedded librarian program. The second is the inclusion of information literacy as a competency within our new general education curriculum. And the third, we're working on developing a library instruction program around the Common Read book, which has been established for our first-year experience course, which will now be required of all our general studies students beginning in the fall. And you'll hear more about these initiatives during the course of the day today. So there's a full schedule planned for you today. You have some excellent keynote speakers, morning and afternoon sessions, which deal with issues such as the revised standards, which I know is at the forefront of all of your minds, media literacy, and different library practices. So it's a very full day, and again, I welcome all of you and hope you enjoy your day here on campus. And if you hadn't had a tour, please include that somehow in your day, because we have a beautiful campus here. So again, enjoy, and thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Mitchell. I am Martha Kruy. I am one of the founders, along with all of you, of the Connecticut Information Literacy Conference. And I want to welcome you all to our 4th annual conference. We have tripled our number since the very first year. I want to first start off by thanking CCALD, the Council of Connecticut Academic Library Directors, for having sponsored this Information Literacy Conference for the first 3 years. Without the CCALD, we could not have made all of this happen. It was an amazing opportunity to learn about information literacy from professionals in the field, and it just may never have happened without CCALD. Next, I want to say thank you to Connecticut Library Association, because they are now our sponsors, hopefully now and for a long time in the future. They have adopted the Connecticut Information Literacy Conference as one of their own sponsored events under the College and University Libraries section beginning this year. The new president of the CLA this year is Dawn Laval, and she is here as one of our honored guests. Dawn, where are you? And here in the front row. And welcome, Dawn. We hope that our conference fulfills, if not exceeds, your expectations today. And thank you especially to the hardworking committee members of this year's conference, starting with Diane Mather. Where are you, Diane? She and I co-chaired this conference together after her other co-chair left to become a prison librarian. And if we can have the other committee members stand up just so that we can see who everybody else is. Thank you very much. The next thing I want to show you quickly is that CLA the CULS section, the College and University Library section, is very small. And we really need to bring in a lot more people to help us run this conference. Not only because it's a lot of work, but because we need new insight, fresh perspectives on the Information Literacy Conference every year, people with ideas about who to have come for speakers. So I'd like you, those of you who are in Connecticut, to consider going to the CLA page, the Connecticut Library Association page, and join when you are capable, when you are next able to go and do this. This is a really wonderful association. It's all volunteer run, and we really do need a lot more people in our little section and for CLA. Thank you to all the speakers for committing to coming and present your innovative and sometimes wild ideas at this year's conference. Without you, we would not have a conference either. And next, I just have a few housekeeping notes before we introduce the keynote speakers for today. The first and foremost, I'd like to have everybody quiet or turn off their cell phones so that we have no distractions. And also to please remember that only water is allowed in this beautiful auditorium. The seats were recently renovated, and we'd like to help Manchester keep it this way. This next thing I'd like to tell you is in your folders that everybody received, you will have a program for the day. In addition to this program, which tells you where your breakout sessions are and who your speakers are, there are 3 other events. One is the opportunity to buy a book after the sponsor welcome. The books are by our keynote speakers, Trudy Jacobson and Tom Mackey. The bookstore will be right outside the auditorium selling those books. There will be an optional before lunch tour, library tour, and the keynotes will be our keynote speakers will be participating in discussion portion of the closing session. So you might want to hang around if you can to listen to them again with our wonderful closing session speakers. There is a campus map, and there's also signage around campus to get around campus if you need to. There are Wi-Fi instructions in your folder. Your requested sessions are identified in your folders as well. Let's see, what else do we have? Door prizes. We are going to be having door prizes at the very end of the session today, of the conference today, and in your folder there is a sticker that has your door prize number on it. You do have to be present to win. We will have a wonderful gift basket donated by Randi Ashton-Pritting from University of Hartford. Thank you, Randi, over there. And 2 copies of the keynote speakers' books, thanks to the publisher who donated those. And the last but not least item in your folder is our assessment form, the survey for this conference. Now you can either fill out the print form of the survey, or you can complete it online, and the directions for that are in your folder as well. So either way, print or online, we really appreciate everything that we can get for assessment so that we can do even better next year. With that all being said, I will introduce Susan, who will introduce our keynote speakers. Thank you very much and have a wonderful conference.
Hi everyone, my name is Susan Slaga-Metivier from Central Connecticut State University, and I'll be introducing our keynote speakers. Trudy Jacobson is the head of the Information Literacy Department at a university at Albany Libraries. She currently co-chairs the ACRL Information Literacy Competency Standards for Higher Education Task Force with Kruy Craig Gibson. She received the Miriam Dudley Instruction Librarian of the Year Award in 2009. Her current research involves meta-literacy, including badging for meta-literacy abilities. The badging system she is creating is in conjunction with Tom Mackey and others, and is proving to engage students and to encourage in-depth, thoughtful work. Neil Schumann, ALA Editions, published the book that she and Tom wrote together, Metaliteracy, Reinventing Information Literacies to Empower Learners, which just came out this spring. The book extends the discussion of the topic beyond their 2011 College and Research Libraries article. Trudy is also very involved in advancing Michelson's model of team-based learning by librarians and wrote about it in the Communications in Information Literacy in 2011. Tom Mackey is Dean at the Center for Distance Learning at SUNY Empire State College in Saratoga Springs, New York. In the fall, he developed the Metaliteracy MOOC with Trudy. In addition, also obviously worked on their book. They previously edited 4 books on faculty library collaboration for Neil Schumann Publishers. Tom's research has been published in Communications and Information Literacy, First Monday College and Research Libraries, Computers in Education, the Journal of Education, College Teaching, the Journal of Information Science, and the Journal of Education for Library and Information Science. Tom is also a member of the editorial team for Open Praxis, which is the peer-reviewed international open access scholarly journal published by the International Council for Open and Distance Education. So without further ado, I introduce Trudy and Tom.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you all very much for inviting us here, for being interested in this topic. We're really happy to be here. I can't tell you how delighted we are with the Metaliteracy Conference. It's so exciting.
We're really excited to be here, and I really always enjoy collaborating on a keynote with Trudy Jacobson, and in some ways I think it embodies what we're trying to get at in terms of metaliteracy, and the collaboration is so key to that.
Oops, sorry. So this is what we'll be speaking about today, metaliteracy, as you would expect, a little bit about badging as well. I'll be talking a little bit about the Information Literacy Framework for Higher Education draft, which some of you may have seen the announcement yesterday that the new draft should be coming out next week, and then a little bit about local implementation of metaliteracy at the University at Albany campus. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Tom.
Thanks, Trudy. And Trudy will be back momentarily. I'm going to set the framework, set up the tone and talk about the framework, the metaliteracy framework, and look at some of the key elements related to metaliteracy. If you notice here, all these key words really focus on the environment that we're in and where we're going in this new frontier. I think what you captured so perfectly in the title of this conference. So it really is a shift, really thinking about the production, the collaboration, participation, sharing information in all of these environments. So if you think about how technology has so radically changed, from moving from the internet to the web to all these mobile devices, and even going from the static web pages that we would sort of access years ago to really dynamic communities online. And that's really what it's all about. And that Tim Berners-Lee, who originally developed the web, he saw from the beginning that the web and web pages, he thought shouldn't just have sort of a viewing piece, but he also thought it was really important that they have an editing capability. So even in the early days of the static web, that's really what it was about, the fact that the web is really about participation. It's about collaboration, sharing. It's not just about viewing, accessing the search and retrieval model. So that's really important. That's what we really tried to capture in metaliteracy. And one of the best compliments I think we've received when we've been at conferences like this, folks have told us, you somehow captured what we knew was there, but you managed to put it in a way that's understandable and really shows sort of where things are going. So that piece of it is really important, sort of how the information abilities really need to change in order to adapt to this environment. And then the other piece of it, in building on this idea of meta-literacy, is that metacognition is really key. And that's something we've really developed. We mentioned it in the first article, but we've really developed it in the book. And I hope you don't mind, I've repurposed one of the graphics that you developed for the conference website, so hopefully that's okay with whoever developed that. But I thought it was really the perfect representation of what we're talking about here in terms of metacognition. This idea of cognition about cognition, or thinking about one's own thinking, that this is something that's always at play, and whether or not we're thinking about this or not, this is something that we're doing. So we really trace this back to Flavel's first article in 1979, and we realized that metacognition itself has become this just huge field, and it's really inspired so many other fields as well. But we really see it essential because what it is, it's something that Flavel mentioned in that article toward the end that I think is really important, is that this is something that can be taught, this is something that can be learned. So it's something that we're doing, but then as teachers, this is something that we can bring to our instructional practices once we're aware of it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I think that's something that's become key to the meta-literacy piece. In fact, what we've done is, when we developed this diagram, we really put it at the center. And so we're saying that information literacy is a meta-literacy for the 21st century. And what we see in this diagram, what we tried to represent, and this was not in the first article, we started developing this when we were doing presentations about that first article, and then we really perfected it right up until the last minute, and I'll tell you about that for the book. So what we've done is, we see this as a transitional framework that really shows why things need to change. And what we tried to do is try to make connections to the original definition of information literacy. So some of those elements are here, but saying that this is transitional and this is where we're going. So at the center of this, of course, is information literacy as a meta-literacy. And we really weren't trying to just totally create something entirely new, although I think in many ways that we have, and that in some ways meta-literacy has taken on a life of its own. But we really saw information literacy as key to that. On the outer, so you've got that center, that's what's at the center. Metacognition, thinking about one's own thinking, being able to encourage reflective practice. That's something that we think, we put it in the center because we really think that involves everything. We even talked at one point of putting it on the outer ring, but we really wanted to put it there to really say that information literacy, meta-literacy, it's really central, and then you move out. So what we did then, you'll see some names that are, or even in the previous version of information literacy, the ability to access, the ability to determine an information need, the ability, of course, to evaluate, because that's really the critical thinking piece of it that we really feel strongly about, and of course to be able to understand information. So again, you're sort of moving out from this core, but then look at what happens. Look at how, this is really where the environment itself has to be factored into this. So now we have a social media environment that's ever emerging, a mobile environment. That means a library is not just a building anymore. A library is in the palm of your hand. And it's not only a library where you're accessing materials, but you're interacting with other people. Online, which of course embodies many of those ideas, and the fact of being online and not just being on site. And then OER, Open Educational Resources, which we also see as key. And this, of course, is with the Creative Commons and other trends in the U.S. and globally, but internationally especially, this idea of open educational resources is really seen as a way to close the digital divide. And it really challenges us to think about how we create and share information for instructional purposes, and it really has potential to transform how students access information. So instead of having to always purchase that really, that $500 book, that a lot of instructors today, a lot of faculty members are really creating materials that are open. So this idea of openness, it's not just about open access, it's really about the development of open materials, the collaborative development of open resources, and I think that's a key element to the meta-literacy framework that I think is really potentially transformative. And it connects to all of these other things too, as we're accessing information on our mobile devices and as we're sharing information, as we're participating in a community. So I really see that as critically important. And what's interesting here too, all these circles, I think somehow it's simple, it looks sort of like a target, but in some ways, I imagine, I'd like to see this as an animation because I can see these things moving. And that they're always going to change and they're always going to adapt. And Trudy's going to talk a little bit about a lot about the work she's doing with the task force. I think that the work that they're doing is going to even help move this in a different direction. So we see this as something that's not as fixed as it appears here. The other piece of this that I think is important is that what we tried to break up is this idea that it happens in sort of steps, that it's just sort of 1 through 10 things that you need to do, that we really strongly believe that the information producer and user today could be entering this cycle at any point, and we really need to be prepared for that. So in the outer ring then, we're really getting toward what we want students to be doing, what we want all participants to be thinking about. And again, it's not just search and retrieval, it's collaborating, it's sharing, it's participating, using, incorporating, and producing. So again, it's really an expansion of that original information literacy definition, but what's driving it in many ways is this environment. And it's not just the technology, it's really the forms of information that are involved in this dynamic information world today. It's how people engage. It's really how we're all connecting with each other in this vast network. And that's not just the web anymore, it's really through mobile. So going back to our original article in 2011, this is really some of the ideas that were really the foundation for this, though. So again, critical thinking is, of course, core to this. And again, that's why information literacy is the meta-literacy. It's not just digital literacy or transliteracy or something else. Information literacy has always been arguing for that part of it. So we really see that that's critically important. Digital age, social media age, we'd probably even expand that to the social media age and mobile age, and all these other ages that are happening. Also this idea that it's a comprehensive framework to effectively participate in social media and online communities. That's key too. We really wanted to, again, we wanted to expand on information literacy, not just sort of take sort of what was there in the core. And I think a lot of people recognize that this needed to change, and that's why we have a task force. But we really wanted to be a kind of a comprehensive, overarching framework that took sort of like the best of the original definition, but then also expanded it. And then this idea, too, that it's a unified construct, so it supports, think about what's the changes here, not just finding and evaluating, but producing, sharing knowledge, and really trying to move away from just the idea of skills. You know, skills are important, that's part of sort of the how you're building as a person. But on top of those skills is really knowledge acquisition, and that's really what we want to get to. We want to get beyond just thinking about sort of discrete skills in a particular setting. We really want to think of the whole person and sort of think about it in a much more organic way, and not just sort of you need to have these 5 skills. So I think that that's challenging, and that's a change. And also thinking about how we think about the world in communities and not just sort of in isolation. So we know that in a classroom sometimes can be a really isolating experience, but when we're trying to do teamwork, we're really trying to get at something very different. We're trying to get at sort of how students engage with each other, how they learn from each other, how they learn in that peer community. So it's not just the teacher that is sharing information. It's really students sharing information with each other and learning from each other. This idea of a comprehensive framework, a unified construct, what we tried to do too in the first article, and then now in the book we expanded it even more, is to really show that there are characteristics of other literacies that really fall within an expanded information literacy. And we also feel that this is a part that's been a little confusing. So I just want to clarify a little bit. We're not talking about multiple literacies or multiple meta-literacies. We're really talking about information literacy as a meta-literacy and being able to recognize that there are characteristics in digital literacy that are important, media literacy, mobile literacy, and what we need to start thinking about as a community is how all of these things connect. So it's not what the New London group was talking about, multiple literacies. That's really not what we're talking about. It's not just a combination of things. It's really information literacy as an overarching meta-literacy and really trying to find those characteristics that really make sense. It's really difficult in today's mobile online world to not consider the visual dynamic that is happening, the fact that it's multiple media formats. So students are no longer just looking at print documents anymore. They're really thinking about multimedia documents. We really want them to think critically about YouTube videos as much as, you know, a journal article. So that's a key part of it too, that again, we expand in the book. We have this chart that really kind of shows how some of the characteristics are similar and how information literacy and meta literacy sort of have new things. But it really, I think the challenge here is to start looking at a comprehensive literacy, and I think that can only be accomplished if you're really thinking about a meta literacy. So this is getting to that point too, because I think that you know, we've been following the tweets and we know what people are saying about meta literacy, and there's some people like it, some people don't. The meta part, I think really a lot of people don't like, other people really like, a lot of people here I hope like, because you're here and you're interested in this topic. But this was really something we've been trying to get across, that it's really not just, you know, not just about introducing yet another literacy, that we really see information literacy as the meta literacy. It really is information literacy that's all about critical thinking, determining an information need. The information part is key to this, and it's key to our world today, and we really want that to be the focus. And another thing that we were trying to work against is this idea that every time you have a new technology, you have a new literacy. So, you know, digital literacy, media literacy, I understand that, but mobile literacy, and I get it, but are we going to just continually go down that path of having these disconnected literacies that have some interesting connections to the information literacy and the other frameworks, or do we want to start thinking in a comprehensive way? I think that's what we want to do, and that really allows for a lot of interdisciplinary thinking about this too, and working across disciplines to think about what is literacy today in today's changing environment. So that's really what we're trying to get at. And it's not that, you know, information literacy shouldn't just be about this one thing. It should be about a lot of different things and really be responsive to the changes today. And I think the task force has really taken on that work, and I think recognizes and understands that. So that was one key point. Another idea here, and I think that this offers a great deal of potential, we really developed this a bit more in the book, and I think that there's more we could do with this. And I'll just read this part, this idea that while literacy, if you just think about literacy and if you look back at some of the definitions of just literacy, it's always focused on reading and writing. Okay, and then you have information literacy that was really, you know, even though it was talking about incorporating and using, there was a strong emphasis on search, retrieval, evaluation of information. But meta-literacy is really what happens after literacy. So it really is not just the reading and the writing, the search and retrieval. It's really this bigger sort of picture view of literacy, of sort of what happens after all that. So that incorporates learning in communities, understanding multimedia types, being able to adapt to changing technologies and changing information modes, being not just a learner, but a teacher, which we think is also key to this. So it's really not just us that are the experts, but it really is we are preparing our learners to be the experts, and that's a sharing of knowledge. So this, to me, is a key part of it. And in the book, we trace it back to the Greek definition that talks about sort of after, and it talks about change and transformation. And, you know, think of words like metamorphosis, and how it's this really fundamental change. So we think that this is what, you know, meta-literacy can bring to the argument, that it's always after that reading and writing. And the reading and writing is important, so that's your base, and we really want to address that. But we're also trying to think beyond that. So all the media, the digital components, the collaboration, being in a social network, disconnected yet connected. So there's so much there that is I think great. I think offers great potential for this idea. And again, thinking of the learner as someone who's actively engaging. And this is another thing that's important too. This was a short piece that we wrote where we actually call it, you know, meta-literacy, advancing learning after literacy. and trying to think in kind of a big picture way about this. And we were reflecting on this, and this is based on a lot of our own experience, but the idea that students, they're incredible consumers of information and devices. They will probably have the device first, but they may not necessarily see themselves as producers of information in academic environments, and that's partly our fault because we don't encourage them to do so. We ask them to silence their cell phones, turn off your, make sure you don't use your laptop in a lecture hall, and iPads and everything else. Don't use Wikipedia because it's a terrible resource. But what happens when you challenge the student to really be an active participant? It also challenges us to really think about how we're teaching. Bring in your laptop, bring in your iPad. Wikipedia, you really want to think critically about what's on there, but did you know it's a peer community that's producing this information, and they have really ambitious goals about providing free access to information for the entire world. It's the ultimate OER. What would your experience be like with Wikipedia if you were someone who was writing for Wikipedia, editing, co-editing, looking for mistakes, but also participating and contributing to that space? And Wikipedia is just one of them, but there's so many other open educational resources, so many other open environments now to be thinking about that. So it's how students think about themselves, but I think it's how we construct students to think about themselves. So we really want to have them thinking beyond producing papers, just papers. I mean, that's important too. I always found that, because that's thinking, writing is thinking. But, what happens when they're co-creating knowledge together? That really changes the dynamic. And if they're not just, pulling YouTube videos for a presentation they're doing, but they're producing YouTube videos, and they're really thinking about it in a critical way. So it's not something that's silly, but it's really something that relates to their learning and their knowledge and their contributions. So really focusing on them as participants, contributors, collaborators, and producers of all this new media. And we're in an environment now where we're excited about all the different trends, but what's going to happen in the next 5 years? Where are we going with this? When we're going to have wearable technologies, which we already have, and all these other sort of devices. We want students to be able to think critically about those devices, but we also want them to be active producers of information in these kinds of environments. And then this leads us to, this was another piece that we wrote together, is as we worked with the Metaliteracy Learning Collaborative, and as we talked about this together and collaborating on all this work, this theme of empowerment came up. And so we really tried to put this into words in this one piece. We were really reflecting on metaliteracy with the questions about the standards. So that really what metaliteracy does is that it really empowers the learner. And it's not us that are doing the empowerment, it's really the learner that's doing the empowerment, because they are the ones who are actively engaged in these environments. They're participants, they're collaborators, they're producers, they're presenters. It really is all that active learning that we're trying to get at. So that is a form of empowerment. The metacognitive piece is important here as well, because if you have reflective learners who are thinking about their own learning, who are asking critical questions about their own engagement in these environments, that is a form of empowerment, because then they too are thinking in new ways about sort of their own learning. And instructors who are writing instructors have been doing this for years, asking for journaling, so getting students to reflect on their writing. In many ways, a lot of the new media formats, such as Twitter, in some ways has a kind of reflective element to it. You've got 140 characters, and you're communicating, you're pushing out information, but there's also opportunities there to reflect. Blogging obviously has that component. Some of the status updates in Facebook, a lot of them could be silly, but there's something there where, it's interesting now, people are constantly reflecting on what they're doing throughout the day, and they're also reading everyone else's sort of reflections about what they're doing throughout the day. So there's a metacognitive piece to that I think we really need to harness and in our own teaching, because I think it will contribute to sort of this idea of critical thinking. But it really is an empowering piece. Again, for the learner, I think, and it means too that we have to think about our teaching in these environments so that we create empowering environments for students. So this is the other figure that we came up with. Again, how do you take all these ideas and put them in a figure, because it kind of fixes it. But this was really helpful for us And this really came out of our work with the Metaliteracy Learning Collaborative and the development of very specific learning objectives for metaliteracy. And Trudy will talk about how those objectives are having some influence in the new information literacy standards. And again, looking at the whole person, we know that the whole person at the center has all of these different components. So it's the metacognitive piece, it's the cognitive piece, it's the behavioral aspect of learning and experience, and it's also the affective. And again, we talk about this in quite a bit of detail in the new book, but again, that's mediating then sort of where we want to go. So if we recognize the meta-literate learner at the center, that the person is complex, that we're, again, pushing out, we really want the outcomes are on the outer ring, so that the fact that they're a participant, they're a communicator, a translator of information, an author, a teacher. Again, the learner becomes the teacher. It's not just the teacher that's expressing information or knowledge or articulating knowledge. Collaborator, producer, publisher, researcher. And I'm sure that you could add to this too, and that's what we hope people are thinking about. But these are much more active roles that, of course, go beyond finding and using information. And the metacognitive piece, this is one of my favorite images, and we've used this several times. We're always trying to repurpose it in a little bit, but I think this really articulates it, because the idea of the artist creating a self-portrait is really metacognitive, because it's not the artist, sort of like not a photograph of the artist, it's the artist, sort of how the artist sees themselves as an artist in front of the easel. So the artist is really stepping back and kind of giving us a sense of who they see themselves as. You think of Van Gogh and Rembrandt, I mean, it's just fascinating throughout art history how that's happening, and how they're representing themselves, how they think they see themselves, and how they're projecting out a particular image. So I think that that's something that's really important. I want to talk a little bit about our Metaliteracy MOOC, because this was really an opportunity for us to embody a lot of these ideas, and then I'll be handing it off to Trudy in just a few minutes. So I'll talk about this a little bit. It wasn't enough for us to, finish this book. We thought, well, let's do a MOOC too. Okay, so last summer, we were really going crazy because we were developing and putting the MOOC together, and we were putting the finishing touches on the book. But it really was perfect because it helped us pull all of these ideas together, and there was a really interesting interrelationship of information. We created what was called a connectivist MOOC. So it's not Coursera, it's not edX. It's a completely open environment that is still available. So if you go to that URL, or if you even just Google Metaliteracy MOOC, you'll find it. And we put in there a lot of definitions of metaliteracy. And we had this, it was structured like a course, but it was completely open. It was open to our students at the University of Albany and the Empire State College. And we'll talk about some of the difficulties that we ran into with that. But this is kind of a snapshot of really what was at the heart of it. So we had a structured course that was open to everyone. Anyone could register. But we also had these Blackboard Collaborate sessions where you can see there's all this sort of conversation going on. So here we had Brian Alexander, who was talking about digital storytelling and metaliteracy, and he's talking with one of our faculty members, Nicola Elaine, who developed a course for us called Digital Storytelling. And then you have the chat room, and there's all these conversations that are happening, very dynamic, in many ways embodied what information literacy is. Then we also had Sue Thomas, who obviously is an expert in transliteracy, and also has developed this whole idea of technobiophilia. So she was kind of, in many ways, talking about that. And we really liked the way that she repurposed our graphic. And if you see here, too, if you notice that the collaborate was kind of these words that are jutting across it. As we were finishing the book, we decided to move that out to the outer ring because we realized that that was really more of an outcome than just something that we wanted to show in such an obvious way. So we were then engaging with these international speakers about metaliteracy. They were bringing their own perspective to it. Paul Prinsloo from South Africa, UNISA in South Africa, who's an expert in open and distance education. And he did a great talk as well. And we had asked him to give a global perspective, and he really starts off by saying, it's really not possible to do a global perspective. I can really only talk about my local perspective. And that was just really, so he really challenged sort of what we were asking him to do. but he was doing this from South Africa, and we were in this synchronous mode of having a conversation with everyone who was participating. And now it's also available as an asynchronous experience as well. So overall, we had, because it was totally free and open, you could just register for it, over 500 registrants. And our courses at Empire State College, our online courses are capped at 20, so this was a big deal. And again, it was free, so we weren't getting money from this. It was really about creating an experience, a learning environment that was connectivist. We had over 400 newsletters, which I'll talk about in a second. We had over 100 registered blogs, 72 blog posts, 3 sections of information literacy at the University of Albany were a part of this, and 1 graduate student at Empire State College. We didn't get as many undergrads as we didn't get any undergraduates. I'm going to go through this quickly because it just shows the difference between a CMOOC, a connectivist MOOC, and the ones that you've probably heard of more often, which is the XMOOCs. But the CMOOC, this is a great quote because it's really about discursive communities creating knowledge together. And that's really meta-literacy. So that's why we decided to go with a connectivist MOOC. So we created the environment. We didn't use Coursera. We didn't use edX. Everything that's in that MOOC that you see, we created. And we had an instructional designer who helped us. But we created the environment and created a very dynamic knowledge community. And the very first one that was ever done was done by Stephen Downes. We actually did the very first one in the SUNY system. And then our Metaliteracy MOOC was the third one that was done in SUNY. And XMOOC, the Coursera MOOCs are a little different. They're structured in a way more like an online course, but they're open to everyone. And the videos, it's very different because the videos are kind of pushing out information. There's a lot of discussion that's happening within the MOOC and a lot of really interesting technologies, but it really is a little bit, it's not as sort of interactive as the connectivist MOOC. And this just shows you quickly sort of how the environment is dynamic and interactive, and how the participant becomes a part of the MOOC. So while Coursera is pushing out information, our students, our participants, actually became a part of the experience. And at the very top right, there's something called Grasshopper. Stephen Downes, who was one of the original co-founders of the MOOC movement, created this programming called Grasshopper. So that's really what's driving it. So it's basically an RSS aggregator. So anyone who participates in the MOOC submits their blog. So anytime that they put a new post, it becomes a part of the MOOC. So when you go to that URL and check it out, it's really cool because you'll see Twitter feeds, you'll see blog postings. The user becomes a participant, a collaborative part of the community. And that's what's really exciting about it. So we were incredibly excited about it because it embodied meta-literacy. But Trudy now is going to talk about some of the things that didn't go exactly as we expected. But that's what makes it so interesting.
Thank you, Tom. All right, so I'm just going to back up one or not, right here. So in this newsletter, the first item by Shakira Jones, she was actually a student in the information literacy course that I taught. So I was very happy to see that for the newsletter that Tom picked to put in this slide, that one of the students actually did show up. So as Tom mentioned, things didn't go quite as we expected, particularly in connection with the students. So this was designed, as he mentioned, for students to really engage, connect with other people. We knew that there were going to be professionals in the field. We thought this would be a great experience to have them think about meta-literacy, information literacy in a different way. And even I, though, had some problems with this. So when we were talking about it, and the instructional designer, Carol Yeager, that Tom mentioned, I said, well, I need to put my assigned readings up. You've got some suggestions there, but, this is also a course. And she said, well, that's not the idea of a connectivist MOOC. Really what it is that you put suggestions and people pick the ones that are meaningful to them. And I sort of looked at her funny and thought, but no, there's certain things they've got to know. So I finally came around, but that didn't help a great deal. It helped me in being able to explain it to the students, But this was so unfamiliar to them. They were used to being told what they should read. Then they may or may not read it, but they were used to being told. And so the self-directed choices to them almost seemed to be a way to opt out of any choices. So they wanted a set path, and they were floundering. Now, the students in the section that I taught were mostly juniors and seniors. They were mostly taking it because information literacy is a general education competency. It's a requirement. They don't have to take a library course, but they opted for this course. So they didn't totally understand what it was that they were getting into. They thought it might be an easy one. No, actually, this was more credits, but they just didn't understand. So although we had really high hopes for being able to learn from one another, that really just did not pan out. Another thing that we hoped to have happen was to have students between the two institutions, Tom's and mine, collaborate. I use team-based learning. It was mentioned in my introduction. And so we thought, well, we're really going to push the boundaries. We're going to put students in teams from two different institutions. Tom's students may have been anywhere in the world, so it's not as if they could have met halfway between Albany and Saratoga. They were going to be challenged. The problem was that, as he mentioned, they had one graduate student who signed up for Nicola's course that was connected with the MOOC, but no undergraduate students. So I ended up with just teams of my own students. But we thought that that could have been really, really interesting and very reflective of the idea of metaliteracy and those connections. And the other thing that we really hoped for was that the students would be participating when the MOOC talks were actually happening. There was a bit of that, and the graduate student from Empire State College was in most, if not all, of them, but few of the undergraduate students were. For a while, one of my colleagues' sections of the course met during the time the MOOCs were. They were at noon on Wednesdays, I believe, because that seemed to be a good time regardless of where in the world you were. And so some of them did participate live, but my students mostly submitted questions ahead of time based upon any information that was available on the MOOC. They didn't necessarily do the readings, but they were able to find out some. They submitted questions, and some of the speakers did use them, and that was one thing that really engaged the students. Oh my God, my question was chosen. You know, this person at Ohio State University or South Africa actually spent time thinking about my question and responding to it. So that part did work. So the MOOC was very much an interesting and engaging experience. We think that if we had been teaching graduate students, it probably would have worked really well, especially, you know, in the past I've taught graduate library school students, and that would have been probably the right audience. As it was, approximately half of my undergraduate students either dropped the course or I suggested that they drop the course. But the ones that remained, some really did engage. We will take questions too about the MOOC later. I know that there are people here who did participate in the MOOC and may have comments about it later when we take questions or open it for discussion. What I wanted to do is move to talking a little bit about badging. And how many people have heard about badging in connection with education? Yeah, so it's something that's really becoming more well-known, this idea of competency or proficiency-based learning, where you can actually show what it is that you're accomplished at. But it's the same idea sort of as scout badges, and so Tom found this great photo here. And when I first heard about it, I did think about scout badges. I was a Girl Scout for 1 year, and it just wasn't for me. I did earn a couple of badges, but I'm thinking, badges? You've got to be kidding me. oh, you know, that's so lame. But it was part of the Metaliteracy Learning Collaborative, and a colleague of ours mentioned this, and so we put it into the grant application and decided we would look into it, and that was about as far as I was willing to go. But when we were looking into it, we went with a company named Learning Times, and they set up a way to learn about badging through sort of navigating their interface. And the members of the Metaliteracy Learning Collaborative, which a number of people from SUNY institutions, there's some librarians, an instructional designer, some faculty members, we started going in and trying it out. Well, we're all type A personalities. Oh my God, she got that badge before me. How did she get that community badge? How did she figure that out? I've got to get one of those. I've got to one-up this person. Oh, it was really pretty bad. But it gave us an idea of sort of how it would work, and I know that not all of our students necessarily, or others who decide to do it, are type A personalities, but that goal of the badge, I don't know, I guess I was like 12 years old again. So we went with it. It has elements of gaming to it. So we call them quests and challenges and then badges. But it's not, I'm not a gamer, but I don't think that there's a whole lot of gaming to it, but there's just these goals that you can reach. Now what's attractive to it, about it to the students is that these are shareable. You may have heard about Mozilla Badge Pack. We're using Credly for ours, but through those services, you can put it on LinkedIn, you could put it on an online portfolio. So there's ways of letting people know about it and also letting them know that this has been issued by a reputable organization, what it was that you learned, so that there's the metadata that goes with it that's really very important. So this group in this Metaliteracy Learning Collaborative started working on a badging system, and Tom earlier mentioned the Metaliteracy Learning Objectives, and there are several of those. Our original article in 2011 had some, and then the Metaliteracy group worked on some as well. And so I'm just going to very quickly go through them. You can see there's a graphic with each one. We had a designer come up with the badges to go with them. But this is goal one. So the evaluation, and Tom talked a lot about that. This is a critical part of information literacy. We all know that. But Metaliteracy extends this evaluation into an environment that's in flux. So there's a more nuanced ability at play here, being adept at assessing content that changes and accumulates different layers through participation. And so it's much more than just looking at something that's static and being able to evaluate that. So for each of these goals, we have a number of objectives, and I'll talk about each of them, but the URL is there too in case you're interested in taking a look at them. So the second one, another one that really looks like it overlaps with information literacy as we've thought about it at this level, but again, looking at the objectives, there really are some differences. So an example of one of the objectives is to differentiate between the production of original information and remixing or repurposing open resources. Another is distinguish the kinds of information appropriate to reproduce and share publicly versus sort of private information that is disseminated in more sort of private spaces. So some of the things here, I've always taught about this in the course that I teach, the personal privacy, the information ethics, but some of these learning objectives take it to a level that I hadn't thought about before teaching, and it's something that we're putting into the badging system. And there's a very communal or social aspect that's important in metaliteracy that showed up in the graphics that Tom had in his part of the presentation. Talks about Wikipedia and being able to not only be consumers of this information, but to be the ones creating that information. And that's really been a hurdle, and he mentioned this as well, of having students see themselves that way. And that was something that I really wasn't expecting in quite the way that I've been having it manifest itself in my courses. And then the fourth one is there's some overlap here with information literacy, particularly Standard 5, but showing how this sort of continues throughout your life, the personal, the academic, the professional goals, not too different, but thinking of some of the objectives. One is demonstrate empowerment through interaction and the presentation of ideas, and gain the ability to see what is transferable, translatable, and teachable. And again, as Tom mentioned, the idea that learners are both students and teachers. There may be things they know really well, and they're teaching others. Students do that in my class all the time with technology or ideas that we're talking about. So this, which I know is very difficult to see, but if you go to metaliteracy.learningtimes.net, you can sort of see this played out. I don't think we actually have this particular graphic there. This is one of 4 top-level badges. And in here, I think there are, if you start at the bottom, so those just blue and white magnifying glass badge images down at the very bottom in each category, those are the quests. And students start with the quests, work their way up. So database searching, search queries, and information sources would work up to that sort of darker blue magnifying glass image. That was sort of a later one. That one we put in when working with some faculty members on campus. They wanted some of the more traditional types of library research things. The evaluation points are there. Packaging and sharing, the ones that goes to that orange magnifying glass. Format and mode. We all know that those are really important for students. I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I apologize. Those are very important for students to know about and realize that they may not be as, they need to understand them better, but not put too much faith in them. And so that packaging and sharing challenge, after they've done those quests, they need to reflect upon what it was they went through and their own experiences. So the metacognition is in here. I specifically would like to mention the collaborative creation challenge, which is the next to last on the right. Tom worked on that with the 3 quests, and they are feedback mechanisms, speaking out, and informed consumers. Tom's very, very busy. He's a dean. We've been working on these. I've been working on writing some of them. Some of the other members of our Metaliteracy Learning Collaborative have been writing them. But I really wanted to get him to work on some. And he finally agreed. But he's busy, so it took a while. But when he did, these are just outstanding. And I think if you have a chance to go and take a look, the feedback mechanisms is sort of looking at social media and the responses that people are giving, but he framed it around, if you are going to be taking a trip to Speaker's Corner in London, what would you need to find out about? You know, you need to find out about your flight and your hotel and, you know, the information that other people are providing, and then plan your trip, which is really cool, and the students really get into it. And then speaking out, I had expected at the end of it, there'd be something about what you'd be talking about at Speaker's Corner in London. So Tom did another quest that's really very good, and there's a little video in there about how to do public speaking, and then students pick a topic and they think about what they would do to engage their audience. And I just read one of these from a student of mine, and they're really excited about doing this. So some of them are a little bit more traditional, some of them aren't, but they're engaging the students. And so that's one of 4. I, in the spring, was teaching a 1-credit course and asked my students to do 18 of the items on the screen. And that was just their assignments. That wasn't their major project. That wasn't what they were doing in class. I ended up giving them 2 credits because I realized I had pushed them beyond the bounds of rationality, sort of. But they weren't complaining, which was just mind-boggling. And then this is the site. So if you go to it, there's some information about it along the top. It just tells about, there's one token that was again developed for a professor at the University at Albany. She wanted an introduction to the library, both the physical library and the virtual library. So we put that in, but the rest are really the quests and the challenges and the badges. So students can log in, sign up, log in, work through it. And it's not something that's auto-graded, so there is a lot of work behind it. So I'm reviewing all my students' work. Other faculty members who are using it are reviewing theirs, giving them comments. But I think that's what makes it such a rich learning environment. So as I've been saying, students are really engaged in it. It's been a pleasure to see. The quality of their work, it's not all perfect, but the very first item I got from one of my students in the spring was for the format mode, and they had to go and find information on their topic in different formats and then cite it properly and talk about the format. Would you be able to collaborate on this, create something like this, share this? And then how would you do it? I wasn't teaching any of those things. I didn't even teach them how to cite. And this came back so beautifully done, just learning through that quest. She is an exceptional student, but I have seen many of these come through the same way since then. So it's really, with team-based learning, you flip the classroom, but I have flipped it even more, and I've gotten to the point that I'm not quite sure what to do in each class when they actually show up because they've learned it. So, and then they're really interested in earning the badge, and I was thinking they just wanted to put it on, LinkedIn or wherever. But one of the students said, I need something to talk about with people who are interviewing me. This is really different. They will be interested in this. And we have found, another institution has done a survey, one of our collaborative members talked to some employers. Many of them are using badging themselves. They understand what it is. They want to see sort of this proof of this competencies from people they're hiring. So I think that the student is correct in that. There's interest from faculty members in it. We have a writing and critical inquiry program, and they are using this to some extent. Our provost was willing to give us funding for it when our grant ran out, but it takes time to review. I just really quickly want to show you a graphic. This is something that a student gave for a content analysis overview, which was part of that critical analysis badge. So let me move on to the framework for information literacy for higher education. I'm just going to talk about it briefly now because we do want to leave time for questions, but I have a session this afternoon and we'll be talking a little bit more about it then. And some of you may have seen that a new draft is going to be coming out next week, and this is what will be contained within it. So there is a new brief introduction. The older introduction has been moved to later in the document. That was more theoretical, setting the stage, so it's now being called setting the context. There's recommendations for how to use the framework. There are 6 frames. These are the threshold concept units. We were calling them threshold concepts, but they're more than that. So there's additional information with each one. And we had an in-person meeting in Chicago and sat around for, I'd say, a good 20 minutes or so trying to figure out what are we going to call these units? Should we call them units? Should we call them sections? And somebody said, well, this is a framework. Could we call them frames? And it's like, we just wasted 20 minutes, but, thank you, Troy. He came up with, what they're going to be. So you're now going to see them referred to as frames. The readings and glossary were there originally. Setting the context, as I mentioned, is the original introduction. There's an introduction for faculty and administrators that was written by the 2 non-librarians on our task force, although they were librarians in a previous life. And then there's going to be this online space, the sandbox that we've been talking about, but we now have a commitment that that is going to happen. Okay. And there is a new definition of information literacy. It has changed a little bit from the one that was in that original introduction from the draft, and I think it was February, and it's informed by metaliteracy. And then the 6 frames will have the threshold concepts with their descriptions, the knowledge, practices, and abilities, which you've seen, the dispositions. The assignments, though, are going to be moved into a separate document and then put into the sandbox. There was the worry that they might date them, and that change came from feedback that we got. And many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with threshold concepts. Lori Townsend, who's one of the authors of this piece, is doing her research on this along with Amy Hoffer and Brunetti, and there's somebody else, last name Lou now, who are working on this. But these are these core ideas and processes, and they, in their research, have identified them. They say that they often go unspoken or unrecognized, as they're citing the work of Jan Meyer and Ray Land. And I think they're things that make sense to a lot of us. We hadn't really thought of them as threshold concepts, but they're the kinds of things students really do need to know. And we're using them because they really do resonate. They sort of allow us to get to that deeper thinking about information literacy. I think they fit very well within the curriculum, and they move from skills to sort of development of knowledge. And Tom talked about that. And we've always said we don't want to make our students become like novice librarians or something, but there's important things that we know that it's important for our students to know as well. And so moving them from novice to expert really is important, and some of those skills just don't do it by themselves. And these are the criteria. Transformative, they cause the learner to experience a shift in perspective. Integrative, they bring together separate concepts into a unified whole. They're irreversible. Once you grasp them, you cannot go back. And that is something that actually makes it difficult for us to think about what these concepts are. They're bounded, so they usually are unique to a discipline, and they're troublesome. They're the ones that really people stumble over. So the 6 frames are here. 5 of them really have already gone up. The new one is information has value. There's 2 titles that are slightly different. Searching is no longer strategic, it's exploration. And format as a process is the new title. So you will see these 6 in the draft that comes out next week. Now, the supporting structure, threshold concepts are very important, but metaliteracy also had a strong impact on the work. There was a previous task force, and one of the things that they said, and I was a member but not the chair of that one, was that metaliteracy, along with some other elements, are really very important, so think about them. And so we have done that. In the first draft, there was a metaliteracy section in the introduction. It was too brief. That is my fault, and I think it caused confusion amongst people who were reading it. But we were trying to keep that introduction very short. My 2 co-authors on that didn't succeed. I did, but it didn't work out. So it ended up being much longer, but the metaliteracy section just didn't work. And then the metaliteracy learning objectives that were in with each threshold concept caused some confusion. So they were taken out in the second draft. I'd like to thank Donna Wittick, who is here today and will be speaking later this morning. She put out a very influential blog post about this. Thank you, Donna. And it really sort of changed the thinking of the task force as to how to incorporate metaliteracy. Okay. So they are now incorporated within the knowledge practices and the dispositions. Some of that happened in the second release for the 2 threshold concepts that came out then. And the new draft definition for information literacy specifically incorporates elements from metaliteracy. You will see critical self-reflection rather than metacognition, but they are in there. And it's also referenced in the new introduction as well as the older introduction. So here is the definition that you will be seeing next week when this comes out, sort of a sneak preview of it. Okay. This was written by Craig Gibson. He's a masterful writer. So that participatory element is in there, the set critical self-reflection, the dispositions, okay, which is something that was not in the standards. And I'm just going to wrap up very quickly with this local implementation piece of the general education competency requirements at the Albany campus. I heard at the beginning that Manchester Community College now has this as well, and I think that's great. We just moved ours into the major. We now have lower level and upper level information literacy requirements. That was not necessarily by design. We put them into the majors, and SUNY Central said, you've got to have it down in the first or second year. So now we have both, which is pretty good, but we're still working it out. So there's a department responsibility. It's in the major. So we're sort of having to let go a little bit. There are new learning objectives for the departments to put it in their majors, and we're having some new conversations. And these numbers are odd by design, but these are the 3 learning objectives that really are influenced by metaliteracy. And these are ones, along with the sort of more traditional ones, that the departments have to show how they are going to incorporate this, whether it's in a course or more often throughout the major. And this was really, I was really trying to push it further than this. There was a small subcommittee that wrote this, but this was about as far as I got. So this one, so we have this in the major, so trying to put this all together. The threshold concepts are really, really engaging faculty members. I'll talk about that this afternoon in my session. But what about if we can put this all together, have badging for the threshold concepts for the disciplines? I think that's pretty exciting. Love to work on that. And then could this be system-wide implementation in some way? This badging system we've put together is for SUNY, all SUNY institutions, and hopefully all institutions, anybody who wants to use it. But we're going to sort of aim at the SUNY level. Could this be something that would have an impact on what's being done elsewhere? So we have something that Tom's going to come up and talk about, and then we'll take questions. And there will be microphones coming around for those who would like to ask.
So we are very excited that our next project is we just received funding from SUNY. They call it Innovative Instruction Technology Grants, and we received the top-tier funding for a proposal to, now that we've done a MOOC and we've done badging, what we're going to do is a new MOOC, title yet to be determined, that will be informed by metaliteracy, but that it really, we want to learn from the first MOOC experience. We want to be a Coursera MOOC that would be really for the students and integrate the badging into that. So we're going to take a Coursera MOOC that will lead to the badging, integrate them using, what is it called? I think Learning Tools Interoperability, LTI. And as part of that, we've also promised to help inform that system-wide implementation because there's interest at SUNY in revising the SUNY-wide, what they call information management requirement. But they're also very interested in incorporating some of these ideas, and obviously with when they have the blessing of the ACRL, and that's going to change, they're going to have to change it. So that's our next project.
Are we now in questions? We are. So thank you very much for listening to all of these ideas.